Hello, I'm Louise Chun from Welldoing. To celebrate Welldoing's 10th anniversary, we're recognizing the people, businesses, and organizations that have been a force for good in the area of mental health in the time since we launched. Today, I'm pleased to talk to the founder of the Motherkind podcast, Zoe Blaski, who has nominated author Lucy Jones. So, hello, Zoe, and hello, Lucy. Good to see you.
Hi, hi, happy to be here. Yeah, me too.
I wanted to start, Zoe, by asking you a bit about the Motherkind podcast, when you started it, how you got into it. I know I was on it once, quite a long time ago now, when I came out to your house to do it. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
early days, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very early day. It was early days for Welldoing as well. And it was the first time I'd done anything like that. I was intrigued. But tell us how the story of how you got to do it.
So when I became a mother 8 years ago, I couldn't believe I didn't know the word matrescence then, unfortunately, and I could not believe the impact that it had on me, predominantly emotionally. I was really shocked actually. And I thought there was something wrong with me and that I was doing it wrong, and maybe I wasn't cut out for motherhood, which makes me want to cry because I absolutely was. I just didn't have the information.
Mm.
So I looked around. I was really into healing and wellness and well-being. And I had been on lots of retreats and I was reading lots of books. And I assumed that there would be a platform or a podcast or a book or a group that I could go to understand the emotional unraveling that is motherhood. And I searched and searched and searched, and I didn't find anything. I found a lot that told me how to feed, a lot that told me that, how to heal physically, a lot that told me about how I should drink gin, because the best-selling book at the time was Hurrah for Gin, which was brilliantly funny, but I was sober, so pretty useless for me. So I went on my own sort of research project and I found lots of incredible things. And I would basically chew the ear off anyone that would listen to me. And one day, I think to shut me up, my group of friends were like, Zoe, why don't you just start this thing that you think is so needed? And I'm sure it was said with more love than in the tone I just gave there. But I really didn't want to. I was like, no, that's not who I am. I don't love having a public persona. I still don't. I'm very introverted, but sometimes, and I think like all of us here, Lucy and I imagine Louise, like sometimes your passion and your mission feels bigger than you. And that's how it felt to me. So I started the podcast, and it turns out there were millions of other women who felt exactly the same way that I did.
Mm.
And so I just kept going. I'm quite stubborn and dogged. And I kept going. I've kept going through lots of personal challenges, and of course the pandemic. And the podcast has, we've never missed a week in 7 years.
Wow, that's
There's
fantastic.
been lots of 4 a.m.s the night before an episode's due out, and I'm scrabbling, trying to get something out, but we have never missed a Thursday. And I'm really, really proud of that, because I think that consistency and just continuing with the message. And now I've even got the bigger privilege of turning the podcast into a book, which is out August the 15th. So it is now a book, everything that I've learned in the past 7 years in my coaching practice. I support lots of mothers and on the podcast.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing that with us, Zoe. And tell me, how did you come upon Lucy and her book Matrescence?
I can't remember. I was thinking about this. I think I probably saw it online, or people now send me things, and
Yeah.
some in the community are like, "Have you seen this? Have you seen this?" And I think probably someone sent it to me, and that word matrescence was really important to me and motherkind, and I often wondered if someone would write a whole book on it. Someone said there's this book, and I immediately reached out to Lucy, I think, and said, "Come and talk about it."
Yeah.
And we had an amazing connection. Both of us cried, I think, within 10 minutes of that recording, didn't we? Because I think we both feel so deeply about the power of the word. And I felt so moved by Lucy's words. Like, I know it sounds obvious, but Lucy is an unbelievable writer. And I think to put together like an incredibly powerful word that has been hidden for women for too long with Lucy's beautiful, poetic and gut punching style of writing, I think those two together is just an incredible combination. So I sort of inhaled Matrescence. I think I got an early copy. I did get an early copy. That's right. Got an early copy, which didn't have the cover that we know. It just had a plain cover on it, and I had it in my kitchen actually. And I have a lot of mum mates and out for play dates, and they're all like, "What's this?" And so it sort of got passed around a bit as well, which was really, really nice. And yeah, I just loved it, and I think it's incredibly powerful what Lucy's done with Matrescence, and I feel grateful that you wrote it, particularly in the season of motherhood that we're in. Anyone that can produce anything, let alone a book, with young children is a hero in my eyes.
Yeah. So, Lucy, over to you. Congratulations on winning a Welldoing Inspiration Award. I wonder if you could, well, just to say too, as you know, I'm a huge fan of your book, and I've interviewed you before when we featured you as when we featured Matrescence as one of our books of the month. How did you feel when you found out you'd been nominated for a Welldoing Inspiration Award?
I felt very moved and very thrilled, and it means a lot to me. What you have made and created with Welldoing, and my personal experience, I'm a big fan of therapy and have got so much from talking to therapists over the last 15 years or so. And for it to be recognised in this way, and from Zoe as well, it just means the world. It's really special. So
Thank you for that. It's our delight. I wonder, can you tell us how you came to write this book, and also explain, for those who haven't read the book, what matrescence is?
Yes. So matrescence simply means the process of becoming a mother. It's not my word. It was coined by Dana Raphael, the late American anthropologist in the 70s. And it means the physical, psychological, emotional, social, political, economic, spiritual, existential, sexual metamorphosis of becoming a mother. And of course, that's very individual for different people in many different ways. But this word, this concept, is a really useful framework, I think, for giving us a language and a way of making more visible the transition of pregnancy, childbirth, and motherhood. And of course, sometimes, that doesn't involve pregnancy with adoptive parents or non-biological mothers. Making that visible and giving us a way of caring more for new mothers and new parents who, as we know, are experiencing high levels of stress and burnout and depression and anxiety. So I came to write about my own matrescence to try and make sense of it. Very similarly to Zoe, I was profoundly shocked by becoming a mother, and my baby was spectacular, as all babies are. But I found the identity change, the social change, the loneliness, the kind of oppressive maternal ideals, really, really tricky. And discovering the word matrescence in an article in the New York Times was a huge moment for me. I remember my shoulders dropping, and I felt like I could breathe, and realised that it is a significant developmental stage which we've neglected and forgotten about in our culture. So that propelled the writing.
And without asking you to repeat what you've just said, but what do you think makes it so different from other books about birth and parenting, for the people who came before? What Do you think it's a greater level of honesty?
I think that one of the aspects which people seem to connect with in Matrescence is my a motif and pattern of the natural world. So I cut the text with these ecological vignettes, volcanoes erupting, caterpillars turning into butterflies and being in the goo in the chrysalis, spiders eating their own mothers. These were kind of metaphors and stories in the wider world which helped me to make sense of this experience of change and process, where I felt that although I eventually, read people like Adrian Rich and so on, in our patriarchal society, I couldn't really find many cultural depictions of this experience of becoming a mother and the kind of existential heft of it, and also the chaos of it and the kind of violence of birth and the animalness of it all. So I brought in those stories from the earth, and I think in some ways that maybe makes the text, readers have said, kind of relatable for anyone in a transition. So not just for people entering parenthood or motherhood, but we all go through different metamorphoses. In terms of, I don't know what kind of sets it apart from other books, I guess. I think that we are living in a time now of quite bizarrely oppressive maternal ideals in a different way to what it was like kind of at the end of the 20th century. So I think, the last kind of 10, 20 years, we've seen this rise of intensive motherhood, as it's called, in conjunction with more knowledge about child development. And the problem is not the needs and requirements of the children, it's that mothers who are also working are, our role is very much overemphasized as being, everything for children. And I think that means that what I can see in my peer group now is really shocking levels of tiredness, stress, burnout, and compounding that is the mask of motherhood. That was a Susan Mousehart term, but I think, I've been written to by hundreds of women, and I'm sure Zoe, you've had the same experience since publishing Matrescence. And I see a real sense of shame and stigma and silencing among mothers who haven't been able to articulate their lived experience or feel that they could even talk about how they feel. So I think we are still, even in our supposedly progressive liberal age, in a time where the psychological police state of motherhood, as Douglas and Meredith called it, is still strong. And stories such as mine, and there are many other books, there is an appetite for that. And all the stories on Zoe's podcast as well. I think there's a real appetite for talking, sharing, opening up.
I wonder if you could talk about some of the highlights of people's response to it, what any sort of stories or things that are particularly, you particularly enjoyed or taken pleasure from.
Well, it's been an extremely moving and gratifying experience to connect with so many women and people since publishing Matrescence. The content of the book is very personal and quite honest, quite graphic, quite raw. And I suppose in some way that means the messages that I've had back have been also quite similarly personal and moving. And in a way it's quite bittersweet. It's quite healing for me to hear that other people feel the same, but it also makes me feel even more enraged and emboldened to continue talking about this subject, and realizing that people walk into this portal of motherhood, and it's not just that we have inadequate social care and social support for mothers, and infrastructure is hostile to families and so on, but it's also that the experience and the meaningfulness of motherhood, I think, is also taboo, that it's hard to talk about being a mother. It's so hidden. It's almost kind of unfashionable, or it makes people feel a bit queasy sometimes, I think. So I think there's so many facets of motherhood which are taboo, and that's kind of come across in my my correspondence. But I've also been so enlivened and excited to hear from people about, and I'm sure, Zoe, you've seen this too, a real like mushrooming and emergence of circles, to bring women together, kind of creative groups, new mother writing groups, postnatal peer support, drawing groups, making zines, singing groups, ways of people kind of creating their own villages. And it's always just really moving if people have read my book, and that's part of it too.
And of course, there's been, both of you will have noticed that there's been a lot more attention to, neonatal services, birth trauma. It does seem to, that both of you seem to be, in an area whose time has come, whether that really will be followed through or not. It's certainly been talked about very much in the media, isn't it? Which is great. I wonder too, for both of you, whether you feel that the mental health of mothers, particularly new mothers, is now being seen much more seriously than it was. Perhaps you first, Zoe.
Yes and no would be my answer. I think yes, there is more of an understanding of the timeline of the impact of motherhood on your mental health, because Lucy's work really does a lot. And I think that's why matrescence, that word, is so powerful, because unlike, we didn't have a word before it. I think women would say, my baby's 2 and I still don't feel right. And I think that shoulder dropping that Lucy and I both experienced learning this word is that it's permanent. And I think that's the relief, because I think we had been told, not just told, we had been signified, hadn't we, that, you have a 6-week check and then you are signed off. Okay, so I have 6 weeks, or even you have a year maternity if you're lucky enough to have that situation. Okay, so I have a year. Whereas actually what Matrescence did, that word and Lucy's work really pushes that timeline out. And I think that is vital. Is what we do know is that often mental health of mothers deteriorates, far into, 2-3 years in, and often with the arrival of another child. That's what I hear consistently in my community. I was okay until a second came in, and then the gaps became chasms and I couldn't cope anymore. So I think that's one thing that's really happening and is really important. And there's some amazing work going on at the moment to change how that 6-week check is done, to change the timing of it, to change the focus on the mother, because what tends to happen at that check is 98% about the baby and then a quick check-in with the mother. And I think if ever there's a metaphor for how mothers are prioritized, it would be that, it's like, okay, all 98% and then the 2%. Of course, not realizing that if it was the other way, a mother who's okay tends to be able to care very well for their baby. So I think that's changing, and that's important. The reason I say no is because the proof will be in the pudding, won't it? Let's see where the budget goes. Let's see where the real support is put in place. So I think you're absolutely right, Louise. We're in Lucy and I in such an exciting field.
Yeah, I think it's a great time in many ways, and a lot of people, I've spoken about the book to people my age who I've got a granddaughter, and 3 children who are all adults, but I can recognize a lot of what you're talking about, although the pressures were different, placed differently, as happens in generations. And what about you, Lucy, on this issue of maternal mental health? It seemed to me that it would only be talked about as a very extreme thing, the sort of suicide or kind of dreadful stories, but actually it's a huge pressure on a lot of, maybe even the majority of young mothers are struggling, with their mental health at this point. I mean, do you see change coming? Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the statistics are just galling and parlous, that mothers are at their most, women are at their most risk of contracting, getting depression around having a baby, and suicide is in its biggest risk in that first year. And there's grotesque inequalities of care across class and racial lines. I think that I think there is still a sense of individualizing maternal mental health in a way that needs evolving. So in Matrescence, in the book, I kind of call for a more like biopsychosocial idea, kind of way of thinking about healthcare for new mothers. My sense is that people I know, I also were diagnosed with postnatal depression or postnatal anxiety, and often they will feel, a great sense of shame and failure, and that there's something wrong with them. But I think that fails to, like, we fail to see that actually, feeling a bit depressed or anxious or lonely is quite a reasonable response to the way we design modern motherhood. There was a really fascinating study recently, Zoe, I'm sure you saw it, of a hunter-gatherer people by an evolutionary anthropologist called Nikhil Chowdhury. And looking at that group, they found that allo mothers, so other helpers, would help the mother. Like between 10 or 20 people would be helping the mother every day. So the mother would respond to the baby about 40% of the time. And the conclusion is that, that may have been our evolutionary history to have that amount of support around us. So if we think about it from that perspective, it's no wonder that, women are struggling. And I think and I know that Nikhil Chowdhury is making a leaflet for the NHS at the moment. They're going to put a leaflet out about, how we evolved in these collective communities and so on, which I think is quite interesting. But I'd love to put a bit more light and attention more on what I would deem our societal care disorder or social dysfunction disorder that I think I see, where we don't look after the vulnerable, we don't care for those who are dependent enough. I'd like to see a bit of a balance, and I don't know if we are seeing that yet, but I think that's important, because I think women internalize it, and then that prevents kind of social change and transformation, which we so need.
Now you both have busy working lives and you're mothers. I mean, Zoe, how many children do you have?
I have 2. One is 8, one is 4.
Right. And Lucy, you have 3, is that right?
Yeah, I have 3.
3.
7.
And I'm wondering, what do you do for your own mental health and wellness? Lucy, do you want to share any tips you have or good ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I am not very good at it, I would say. I try and get to bed really early. I really do try and get to bed at kind of between 9 and 10. I'm still woken in the night, so sleep is like so important to me. I try and get to the woods when I can, and I find being in the woods really restorative to my nervous system. Baths really help. Books, reading. Those are the things that kind of help me stay well.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Zoe, what about you?
I'm quite lucky because we live by the sea, and I think there's something very healing about the sea and the beach. So I try to go like 5 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes with the kids, sometimes on my own. The thing that I do, I guess, that's kind of more formalized is breath work. So I'm really into holotropic breath work, which is to me, should be prescribed on the NHS for new mothers, because you get to scream into a pillow and no one questions you. So I absolutely love it. It's called breathwork, but I actually keep saying to my teacher, you need to call this an emotional release class, because that is what it is really. It is where a safe space where you get to release any emotion. It's also somatic. Louise, I've been in therapy 20 years, and I'm really into somatic. I'm really into releasing things through my body, not talking things through cognitively.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that breath work or emotional release is just unbelievable. I absolutely love it. And I notice when I don't go, how my nervous system feels different. That my space between my reaction and response time feels much shorter if I haven't done that class. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. That really helps me.
And then finally, I just wanted to ask each of you if you have any tips other than reading your books and listening to the podcast, etc., for somebody who is just about to, as a friend of mine said, have a bomb explode her life. In other words, have a baby. Do you have anything that you would say that would be supportive and encouraging and would feel good for that woman?
Well, I would say listen to Zoe's podcast, because it is absolutely brilliant and an absolute treasure trove of compassion. Whenever I'm feeling a bit kind of roasted or fried by home life, I always find something in that podcast that makes me feel more normal. And I think, finding people that you can talk honestly with, and knowing that, you might feel like goo in a chrysalis for a while, might even be years, but it is possible to, adapt to matrescence, and it doesn't feel really weird forever. And everyone's, going through it as well. There's nothing weird if you find it really hard. And yeah, I think that's what I'd say. The rest is probably in the book.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it, Lucy? Because we've written books on this. It's like one thing. I thank you for saying that about the podcast. That means a lot, actually. And yeah, aside from reading Lucy's book, there's so many things, but actually, I think if someone had said to me, you're finding this really hard because it is really hard, not because there is anything wrong with you. Because what I see almost universally is that when new mothers find it hard, like Lucy said, they internalize that. And I think the moment you do that, you're into the shame and the guilt and the controlling, and you try and make things perfect externally. And that's a really hard place to go to. So I think if we could catch new mothers with that message, it would make a really big difference.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But thank you, both of you. That was really terrific. Thank you for the nomination, Zoe. And just to remind everybody, your podcast is called Motherkind, and your book is out in September, did you say? August, sorry. And also the winner of one of the Welldoing Inspiration Awards, Lucy Jones, and her book Matrescence. So thank you for joining us, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.